Hey guys, tonight we are diving deep into a process so slow, so utterly deliberate, it makes watching paint dry feel like a Formula One race. We're going to explore the mesmerizing, and yes, probably mind-numbingly boring, 4-week journey of creating a fermented incense pot in ancient, or perhaps just old, Tibet. Imagine the crisp, thin air biting at your cheeks, the scent of juniper smoke faintly on the breeze, and the sight of prayer flags fluttering against a backdrop of impossibly vast, snow-capped peaks. You're standing in a small, dusty courtyard, the sun warm on your skin despite the chill in the air. Around you are mud brick walls, prayer wheels, and the quiet sounds of rural life. There's a feeling of immense age here, of traditions that stretch back further than written records can comfortably trace. This isn't a quick craft, this is a commitment. You probably won't survive this narrative without feeling the heavy pull of sleep, and honestly, that's the goal. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. You can also drop your location and time in the comments. It's always cool to see where everyone's tuning in from as they drift off. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on the high Tibetan Plateau, the roof of the world. It's not the bustling, slightly chaotic scene you might imagine from modern travel documentaries. This is a quiet, timeless place where the rhythm of life is dictated by the sun, the seasons, and ancient spiritual practices. The village is small, nestled precariously in a valley or perhaps clinging to a mountainside. The air is unbelievably clear, making the distant peaks seem closer than they are, while also making your own breathing feel a little more effortful than usual. You can hear the gentle clanking of a distant hammer, maybe the bleating of a few sheep, and the ever-present whisper of the wind. This wind seems to carry the very essence of the landscape, dry, cool, and smelling faintly of rock and hardy mountain plants. Your purpose here, though, isn't to trek or meditate, though you could certainly do a lot of both if you stayed long enough. No, you are here to observe, step by excruciating step, the creation of something seemingly simple yet deeply complex, a pot used specifically for burning incense. Not just any pot, mind you, but one crafted through a process that involves fermenting the clay. Yes, you heard that right. Fermenting clay. It sounds about as appealing as fermented socks, but stick with me, or don't. Either way, you're here now. This isn't a quick trip to the pottery studio where you throw something on a wheel and fire it in an hour. This is a process that unfolds over 4 weeks, a testament to patience and a deep understanding of natural materials. It's the kind of thing that makes you appreciate your microwave oven and ready-made candles. The tradition of making these specific incense pots is tied to Tibetan Buddhism and traditional medicine. Incense isn't just about making things smell nice here. It's used in rituals, offerings, and for its purported medicinal properties. The quality and composition of the incense are important, and so too is the vessel in which it's burned. Some traditions hold that the pot itself imbues the smoke with certain qualities, either through the materials used or the energy involved in its creation. It's a bit like believing your coffee tastes better in your favorite mug, but on a much grander, more spiritual scale. One mainstream historical fact you pick up quickly is that pottery making itself has a long and varied history across the Tibetan Plateau, with evidence suggesting techniques dating back millennia. Different regions developed their own styles and methods, influenced by local resources and cultural exchanges. For example, some areas were known for coarser, utilitarian wares, while others produced finer pieces for ritual or decorative purposes. Historians still argue whether specific pottery techniques were developed independently on the plateau or were introduced through trade routes from areas like China or India, or perhaps a mix of both, evolving over time. It's a classic chicken or egg situation, but with dirt. A quirky tidbit you learn is about the spiritual significance often attached to the earth used in pottery. In some Tibetan beliefs, the earth itself is considered a living entity, And taking clay involves a sort of permission or blessing process. It's not just digging up dirt, it's interacting with the land in a respectful, almost reverent way. This isn't just about finding the right consistency for pottery, it's about acknowledging the source of the material. Imagine having to politely ask the ground if you can borrow some mud for your craft project. Adds a whole new layer to getting your hands dirty. As you stand there, the faint sound of chanting drifts from a nearby monastery, a low, resonant hum that vibrates in the thin air. You take a deep breath, the dry, cool air filling your lungs. The sun continues its slow arc across the impossibly blue sky. The feeling of being transported is complete. You are ready, or perhaps just resigned, to begin this slow journey. The first step, you are told, is always about the earth itself. Finding the right ingredients. Because you can't ferment just any old dirt, can you? That would be, well, just dirt. This is fermented dirt we're talking about. Big difference. Like cheese versus milk. Or, okay, maybe not exactly like that. But it sounds more impressive. The process you're about to witness isn't written down in a slick instruction manual. It's knowledge passed down through generations, learned by doing, by watching, by feeling the earth in your hands. There are no precise measurements, no digital timers. It's all intuition, experience, and a connection to the materials and the land. It's the opposite of flat-pack furniture instructions. You can't skip steps, and you certainly can't rush it. You might try to explain pH levels or microbial activity, but here, it's just the earth working, the spirits allowing, or perhaps simply how it's always been done. The thought of spending 4 weeks focused on one pot might seem excessive in a world of instant gratification. But there's a different sense of time here, one where patience isn't just a virtue, it's a necessity. The altitude, the weather, the sheer effort required for manual labor, it all slows things down. And maybe, just maybe, that slowness is part of what makes the final product special. Or maybe it's just slow. We'll find out, won't we? Hopefully before you fall asleep. Although, if you do, mission accomplished. The first hint of action comes from an elder in the village, gesturing towards the edge of the valley. The materials aren't just lying around in a convenient pile. You have to go and find them. This isn't a quick trip to the store, it's an expedition, even if it's just a short walk. The quality of the soil, the presence of certain minerals, the absence of others, it all matters. It's like a scavenger hunt, but the prize is mud. Exciting. You follow the elder, or perhaps just someone designated to show you the ropes, a weathered individual whose face seems to hold the secrets of 1,000 seasons. They don't speak much, or maybe the wind carries their words away, or maybe you're just not supposed to ask too many questions. The path leads away from the village, winding through rocky terrain interspersed with hardy, low-lying vegetation. The sky above remains a breathtaking, almost impossibly deep blue, vast and empty save for perhaps a circling hawk or the occasional distant cloud. The scale of the landscape here is humbling. You feel like a tiny speck against the backdrop of towering mountains and endless sky. The search for the right clay isn't like digging a hole in your backyard. Not just any earth will do. The expert walks slowly, occasionally stopping to examine the ground, crumbling soil between their fingers, perhaps even sniffing it. You try to mimic their actions, picking up handfuls of dirt, but it all just looks and smells like dirt. To them, however, there are subtle differences, variations in color, texture, moisture, even scent, that indicate the presence of the right kind of clay. It needs to have the right plasticity when wet, but also the ability to hold its form and not crack excessively when drying. It's a Goldilocks situation, but with geological deposits. Not too sandy, not too silty, just right. This specific clay often comes from a particular vein or deposit somewhere in the surrounding landscape. It might be near a dried-up riverbed, a hillside slope where erosion has exposed layers, or a specific type of geological formation. Locating the best source is knowledge passed down through generations. It's like having a secret recipe for your favorite cookies, but instead of grandma's handwritten card, it's a mental map of the local topography and decades of experience. You learn that they might even test small samples by wetting and shaping them on the spot, just to get a preliminary feel for its potential. Along with the clay, they are also looking for other things. Remember, this isn't just clay, it's fermented clay. That means you need something to kickstart the fermentation process. This often involves adding organic matter. What kind of organic matter? Well, it varies by tradition and location, but it might include things like dried plant matter, animal dung, yes, you heard me, dung, welcome to traditional crafts. Or even remnants of old pottery ground into a fine powder. The elder points out patches of certain plants, explaining their potential use, or perhaps gestures towards where local animals graze. You might suppress a chuckle thinking about explaining to your friends that you spent the day looking for poop for your pottery project. Oh, just foraging for artisanal fermentation agents. It's all the rage. The specific type of organic matter isn't chosen randomly. Different additions are believed to contribute different qualities to the clay during fermentation and firing. Some might help with plasticity, others with porosity, and perhaps others with something more intangible, like energy or spirit. It's like deciding between yeast strains for baking bread, except the ingredients might be considerably less sterile. You might see them carefully collecting dried herbs, brittle stalks, or perhaps dried dung patties left by yaks or other livestock. Don't worry, it's usually the dry, non-smelly kind. Mostly. A mainstream historical fact relevant here is the widespread use of organic timber in ancient pottery worldwide, not just for fermentation but also for improving the clay body's performance during firing. Materials like straw, plant fibers, and dung were commonly mixed with clay to reduce shrinkage and prevent cracking. This practice is documented in archaeological sites across the globe, from ancient Egypt to the Americas. It's a universal pottery hack that predates Pinterest by several millennia. Finding the right organic matter might involve a bit of a hike. You might trudge across a meadow, scanning the ground, or clamber up a rocky slope. The vast sky seems to stretch forever above you, making you feel simultaneously insignificant and connected to the ancient rhythms of the land. The air is thin and cool, carrying the dry scent of grass and stone. You might hear the distant jingle of bells from a herd of yaks or the call of a bird you don't recognize. It's certainly more scenic than the aisles of your local craft store. A quirky tidbit is that in some traditions, the specific age of the organic matter matters. Fresh dung might be considered less desirable than dung that has dried and aged for a certain period, perhaps even over a winter. This aging process is thought to alter its chemical composition and make it more suitable for the fermentation process, maybe allowing certain beneficial microbes to develop or less desirable ones to die off. So, you're not just looking for any old droppings, you're looking for vintage droppings. Add that to your mental list of things you never expected to learn. Historians still argue whether the fermentation aspect of this pottery process was primarily discovered for its practical benefits, improving clay workability, perhaps influencing firing properties, or if it held significant ritualistic or spiritual meaning from the outset, with the practical benefits being secondary or discovered later. Was it magic first, science later? Or the other way around? It's another fascinating debate to ponder as you squint at the ground, trying to distinguish useful dried plants from just dried plants. Collecting the materials is a careful, often labor-intensive process. You might help dig small amounts of clay from the identified source using simple tools like shovels or even just digging sticks. The clay is heavy when wet, and carrying even small amounts back to the village requires effort at this altitude. You might fill woven baskets or sturdy cloths with the precious earth. The organic matter is gathered by hand, carefully selected according to the elder's guidance. You might find yourself thinking, is this really necessary? Can't we just use regular clay? But the answer, clearly, is no. Not for this pot. This pot requires the fermented touch. As you gather, you feel a growing sense of connection to the process, even if it's mostly the connection of your aching back to your legs from bending over. You're not just observing, you're participating in the very first physical step of creation. You're sourcing the raw ingredients from the earth itself, under that vast, indifferent, beautiful sky. The sun begins its slow descent towards the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. You've gathered enough for now. The first phase, the scavenging phase, is complete. The real work, or at least the really slow work, is about to begin back at the village. You trudge back, your arms heavy with earth and, well, other things. You can almost hear your muscles complaining already. Back in the village courtyard, the gathered earth is deposited in a designated area. It's probably just a cleared patch of ground, maybe a corner protected from the main flow of traffic. The sun might still be warm, or perhaps the evening chill is already setting in, depending on the time of day you finished your foraging expedition. The earth you collected looks exactly like earth. Piles of reddish or brownish soil, lumps, stones, maybe some roots mixed in. It doesn't look like the smooth, homogeneous clay you might buy in a pottery supply store. Not even close. This is raw, unprocessed stuff. The first step with the raw earth is preparation. It needs to be cleaned and broken down. This isn't done with fancy machinery. It's manual labor, pure and simple. You might watch as someone, perhaps the elder or another villager, begins to spread the earth out on a tarp or a hard surface. They might use simple tools like wooden mallets, hoes, or even just their hands and feet. The goal is to break up the large lumps of earth, pulverizing them into smaller pieces and a finer consistency. Imagine doing this hour after hour. It's surprisingly therapeutic in its repetition, but also, let's be honest, a bit boring. You could probably outsource this to a machine in about 5 minutes, but where's the 4-week process in that? As the earth is broken down, the cleaning begins. This involves removing impurities, stones, pebbles, root fragments, anything that isn't clay. You might see people sifting the broken down earth through coarse screens, or simply picking out the larger pieces by hand. It's a meticulous, patient process. Every little stone removed, every root segment discarded, contributes to the final purity of the clay. You might find yourself kneeling, picking through handfuls of earth, your fingers becoming stained and gritty. It's a good way to connect with the earth, yes, but also a good way to realize how much work goes into making something as simple as mud usable for crafting. This stage is crucial because impurities can cause problems later. Stones can weaken the pot's structure, especially during firing. Organic matter like roots can burn out, leaving voids that weaken the wall. While some organic matter is needed for fermentation, unwanted debris is a no-no. It's about controlled additions, not random junk. Think of it like baking. You add yeast on purpose, but you wouldn't accidentally leave a twig in the dough. As you work, you might hear the steady rhythm of hands sifting or tools breaking down lumps. The air is filled with the dry scent of disturbed earth. The sun continues its progress, or perhaps the moon begins to rise, depending on how long this takes. It's a quiet, focused activity, a sort of moving meditation. You might find your thoughts drifting, or you might become entirely absorbed in the simple task of separating stone from clay. It's the kind of work that probably led to a lot of philosophical breakthroughs, or maybe just a strong desire for a comfy chair. A mainstream historical fact about clay preparation across many ancient cultures is the practice of levitation. This involves mixing the clay with water into a slurry, allowing coarser materials to settle out, and then pouring off the finer clay suspension. This was a common way to purify and refine clay, resulting in a smoother, more workable material. While the method you're observing might be a dry or semi-dry process initially, the principle is the same: get the unwanted stuff out. Historians still argue whether certain ancient cultures developed levitation independently or learned it from others through trade or migration, similar to the general pottery technique debate. It seems like humanity was collectively figuring out how to get clean mud pretty early on. A quirky tidbit related to purification involves the use of magnets in some modern or slightly less ancient traditions to remove iron particles from clay, which can cause unsightly spots or structural weaknesses during firing. Imagine ancient potters wishing they had a giant magnet to wave over their pile of dirt. They probably wouldn't have understood why it worked, but they'd appreciate the results. This traditional method, however, relies purely on manual separation and keen eyes. No magnets, no fancy equipment. Just good old-fashioned sifting and picking. You continue breaking down the earth, feeling the different textures under your fingers. Some lumps crumble easily, others are stubborn and require more force. You become surprisingly adept at spotting tiny pebbles. It's a skill you probably didn't know you needed, and frankly, might never need again after this. But for now, it's your focus. You might even find a fossil or an interesting rock fragment, a small bonus in the endless task of dirt processing. It's like finding a tiny prize in a cereal box made of mud. The volume of earth you started with seems to diminish slightly as the impurities are removed. You're left with a pile of relatively fine, powdery or granular earth, much cleaner than what you started with. It's still dry, though, and definitely not ready to be shaped into a pot. This is just the first stage of refinement. The earth has been gathered, broken down, and cleaned of its unwanted guests. It's a necessary foundation for what comes next. Without this careful preparation, the fermentation process wouldn't work correctly, and the final pot would be fragile or flawed. You might pause for a moment, looking at the pile of processed earth. It doesn't look dramatically different to an untrained eye, but you know the effort that went into getting it to this state. You've literally separated the wheat from the chaff, or in this case, the clay from the pebbles. It's a quiet achievement, a tiny step forward in a very long process. The air is cooler now, maybe the stars are beginning to prick the twilight sky. The silence of the plateau seems to deepen. You feel a sense of quiet satisfaction, or perhaps just exhaustion from the repetitive labor. Either way, the earth is ready for its next transformation. It's about to get interesting. Or at least, slightly different. It's time to add the special sauce, the fermentation fuel. Okay, the earth is processed. It's broken down, relatively free of stones and roots. You've got your pile of cleaner, finer earth, ready for its next phase. Now comes the part that makes this process unique, introducing the organic matter you gathered earlier. This isn't just for structural purposes, like adding temper to improve firing. This is specifically to ferment the clay. It's like adding starter to dough or hops to beer mash. You're introducing the life that will transform the inert earth. The organic matter, remember? The dried plants, the well-aged animal dung, maybe some ground-up pottery shards from previous firings. This isn't just thrown in haphazardly. It's carefully measured or estimated based on the volume of clay. There's a ratio involved, likely learned through generations of trial and error. Too much organic matter might make the clay too weak, too little, and the fermentation might not happen effectively. It's a delicate balance, like adding just the right amount of yeast to bread dough so it rises beautifully instead of becoming a flat, sad frisbee. The organic material is often prepared itself before being mixed in. Dried plants might be crushed or ground into a powder. Dung might be dried further and then perhaps crumbled. The goal is to integrate it evenly throughout the clay. You might see the elder or craftsman mixing the materials by hand, or using a simple wooden tool. They might spread the cleaned earth out and then sprinkle the prepared organic matter over it, before beginning to fold and mix it all together. As you watch or participate, you feel the dry earth mixing with the dry organic matter. There's probably a different scent now, the earthy smell of the clay combined with the dry, perhaps slightly musty or herbal smell of the added material. It's still a dry mix at this point, a sort of pre-fermentation blend. It looks a bit like a very unappetizing muesli. This addition of organic material isn't just about adding carbon for microbial activity. It's believed to influence the clay's workability, making it smoother and more plastic over time. The decomposition process that occurs during fermentation breaks down some of the clay particles and produces organic acids, which can chemically alter the clay minerals, improving their ability to slide past each other. It's like the clay gets a spot treatment, but instead of mud masks, it's getting, well, more mud, but with added benefits. A mainstream historical fact is that organic additives have been used in pottery for various purposes for millennia, from temper, like straw or sand, to flux, materials that lower the firing temperature. What distinguishes this process is the deliberate encouragement of fermentation as a key step, rather than just using the organic material as an inert filler or firing aid. It's the process of decomposition within the clay that's valued here. This wasn't just about adding structure, it was about transforming the clay itself through biological activity. A quirky tidbit is the belief in some traditions that the source of the organic matter matters not just practically, but spiritually. Using dung from certain animals might be considered more potent or appropriate for specific types of ritual pots. The life energy or essence of the animal is thought to be somehow transferred to the clay. It's like choosing your coffee beans not just for flavor, but for the energy you hope to absorb from them. Imagine the conversations, "Oh, yes, this pot? It's made with artisanal yak dung, naturally." Really brings out the meditative qualities. Historians still argue whether the practice of intentionally fermenting clay originated as a result of noticing that clay stored for long periods, especially if contaminated with organic matter, became more workable, leading to deliberate experimentation, or if it was part of pre-existing animistic or spiritual beliefs about the earth and decomposition, with the practical benefits being discovered later. Was it an accidental discovery of better mud, or a purposeful spiritual practice that happened to improve the mud? Another classic chicken or egg scenario, this time involving microorganisms and ancient wisdom. You continue mixing the dry materials, ensuring the organic matter is evenly distributed throughout the earth. It's a dusty job. The fine particles rise into the air with each turn of the shovel or hand. You might tie a cloth over your mouth and nose, just to avoid inhaling too much of this ancient, organic dust. It's certainly not glamorous, but it's an essential step. The consistency is still dry, maybe slightly clumpy where the organic matter has stuck together. It feels strange, knowing that this dry mixture is the starting point for a biological process. It needs something else to really get going. It needs water. But not too much, not yet. This is just the dry blending phase. You're preparing the ground, literally and figuratively, for the transformation. The organic matter is now nestled amongst the clay particles, waiting for the signal to start its work. It's like setting up a tiny ecosystem within a pile of dirt. The sun might be setting now, casting long shadows across the courtyard. The air is cooling rapidly at this altitude. The quiet hum of the village settling down for the night surrounds you. You look at the blended pile. It still looks like dirt, but you know there's more to it now. It's dirt with potential. It's a dormant microbial party waiting for the right conditions. You've mixed the ingredients, but the magic hasn't started yet. That requires moisture and time. And maybe a little bit of warmth, though that's hard to come by consistently on the plateau. The next step will be adding the water to create the initial slurry, the liquid base that will allow the fermentation process to truly begin. You feel a sense of anticipation, even though you know this is just the very beginning of a very, very slow process. The organic matter is in place. The clay is ready. The stage is set for the microbial ballet. The blended pile of earth and organic matter sits there, dry and waiting. You've done the foraging, the breaking down, the cleaning, and the initial mixing. Now it's time to introduce the catalyst for the transformation, water. This isn't just about making mud. It's about creating a specific consistency, a liquid or semi-liquid state where the clay particles can suspend and the organic matter can begin to decompose effectively. You're making a slurry. Sounds delightful, doesn't it? Like a particularly unappetizing smoothie. The water is likely brought from a nearby source, a well, a stream, or perhaps collected rainwater. It's added gradually to the dry mix. You might see it being poured carefully, or perhaps scooped from buckets. As the water hits the dry earth, the color deepens, and that distinctive, rich, earthy smell intensifies. It's a smell that speaks of soil, rain, and life. Mixing this slurry is a physical task. It involves plunging hands or tools into the thickening mixture, breaking up dry pockets, and ensuring the water reaches every particle. It's messy. Your hands, if you're participating, will quickly become coated in thick mud. It squishes between your fingers, cool and heavy. The consistency changes as more water is added and worked in, from crumbly and dry to clumpy and wet, then to a thick paste, and finally, with enough water, to a smooth, pourable, or at least spoonable, slurry. The goal isn't soup. It's usually a thick, creamy consistency, like pancake batter that's been left out for a bit too long, or maybe thick gravy before it's quite set. It needs to be wet enough for the clay particles to disperse and for the microbes in the organic matter to become active, but not so wet that it's just muddy water. The craftsman watches the consistency carefully, adding water little by little, mixing constantly. It's an intuitive process, relying on feel and experience rather than measuring cups. You might ask, how much water, and get a shrug and a response like, enough. Very helpful. As you mix, you might hear the squelching sound of the mud, the scraping of tools against the ground or container. It's a rhythmic, tactile experience. The weight of the slurry is surprising, even a small amount is heavy. You feel the resistance of the thick liquid as you stir or knead it. This isn't just about homogeneity, it's about integrating the water fully, ensuring there are no dry pockets left hidden within the mass. Once the desired slurry consistency is achieved, the mixture is transferred to a suitable container or area for its initial rest. This might be a large clay pot itself, a wooden barrel, or simply a designated pit in the ground lined with cloth or hides. The key is that it needs to be contained and kept relatively undisturbed. It's covered, perhaps with a lid, a cloth, or even a layer of straw or leaves, to prevent it from drying out too quickly and to protect it from debris. This first resting period is crucial. It's when the fermentation truly begins. The water activates the microorganisms present in the organic matter. These microbes start to break down the organic compounds, releasing gases and organic acids into the clay body. This process, while sounding a bit gross, it kind of is fermentation, after all, is what transforms the clay. It helps to age the clay, improving its plasticity and workability. Think of it like aging cheese or wine. Time and microbial action create something much better than the sum of its parts. Although I wouldn't recommend tasting this particular aged product. A mainstream historical fact related to this stage is the widespread practice of aging or souring clay even without deliberate organic additives for fermentation. Potters in many ancient cultures found that clay stored wet for periods ranging from days to years became smoother, more plastic, and easier to work with. This aging process, even in relatively clean clay, involves some natural microbial activity and chemical changes that improve the clay body. It's a basic principle known to potters across time and geography. It's like putting leftovers in the fridge, they somehow get better overnight. Well, maybe not all leftovers. This initial fermentation might take several days, maybe even a week, depending on the temperature and the specific composition of the mix. During this time, the slurry is usually left undisturbed. It's like letting dough rise. You just have to trust the process and leave it alone. You might occasionally check on it, perhaps just lifting the cover to peer inside. You probably won't see much happening on the surface, but beneath, a quiet, microscopic revolution is taking place. A quirky tidbit is that some traditional potters believed certain phases of the moon or times of year were more auspicious for starting the clay fermentation process. It wasn't just about practical conditions like temperature. There was a spiritual element, a belief that cosmic energies could influence the transformation of the earth. Imagine planning your pottery schedule around the lunar calendar. Adds a whole new meaning to firing on all cylinders when you're waiting for a full moon. Historians still argue whether the observed benefits of clay aging and fermentation were understood by ancient potters purely through empirical observation and trial and error, or if early alchemical or proto-scientific understandings of transformation and decomposition played a role in formalizing the process. Did they just notice it worked, or did they have a theory about why it worked, however rudimentary? Was it a practical technique refined over time, or was it rooted in a specific cosmological view of materials? You look at the covered container holding the slurry. It seems so passive, so still. Yet, inside, invisible forces are at work. The mixture is quietly bubbling, changing, becoming something new. This initial rest is like the germination phase for the pot. The seed is planted, the first stirrings of life are happening. It's a waiting game, a test of patience right at the beginning of a process that requires an enormous amount of it. You've done the active work for this stage. Now, nature, or rather, microbiology, takes over for a bit. You might feel a sense of completion for this specific step, even knowing how much more there is to come. The messy slurry is made and tucked away. Time for the slow alchemy to begin. The slurry has been resting for a while now, maybe a few days, maybe even a week depending on local traditions and ambient temperature. You've tried not to peek too often, resisting the urge to disturb the quiet alchemy happening within the covered container. Now, it's time to check on week one's progress. This isn't about jumping ahead. It's observing the initial signs that the fermentation is indeed underway. You lift the cover, a heavy cloth, a wooden lid, whatever was used to seal the container. The first thing you might notice is the smell. It's likely different from the fresh, earthy smell of the dry mix or the wet slurry. It might have a tanginess to it, a slightly sour or yeasty aroma, similar to sourdough starter or fermenting vegetables. This smell is a direct indicator of microbial activity. It's the scent of decomposition, of organic matter being broken down by bacteria and fungi. Don't worry, it's supposed to smell like that. It's the smell of potential pot plasticity. As you look at the surface of the slurry, you might see subtle changes. There could be tiny bubbles rising, evidence of gas production from the microbes. The surface might have a slightly different texture or color compared to when you left it. It might have thickened slightly, or perhaps settled with a layer of water on top, indicating denser particles have sunk. The overall appearance is likely still that of thick mud, but with these small signs of biological life at work. You might gently stir the top layer or even dip a hand, carefully, it's still just mud, to feel the consistency. It should feel smoother than the fresh slurry. The fermentation process helps to break down and disperse the clay particles, making the mixture more homogeneous and reducing grittiness. It's becoming more unctuous. Yes, unctuous mud. A word you probably never expected to use. The craftsman or elder observing the process is looking for specific indicators based on their experience. They might judge the readiness for the next step by the smell, the presence of bubbles, the change in consistency, or even the appearance of the surface. It's a qualitative assessment, not a measurement on a scale. They just know when it's right. It's the kind of subtle knowledge that comes from years of working with the material and observing its transformations. This first week of fermentation is critical for establishing a healthy microbial community and beginning the breakdown of the organic matter. If the smell is off, rotten instead of sour, or there are no signs of activity, something might have gone wrong. Perhaps the wrong kind of organic matter was used, or the moisture level wasn't correct, or the temperature was too low. It's a delicate process, reliant on natural conditions. A mainstream historical fact relevant here is that controlled decomposition has been used for various purposes in traditional crafts and agriculture for millennia. Think of composting, fermenting foods, or even tanning hides. Humans have long understood, through observation and practice, that allowing organic materials to break down in a controlled environment can produce useful results or transform raw materials. The fermentation of clay is just another example of applying this principle, albeit in a less common context than making beer or bread. A quirky tidbit is that some traditional potters believe that the mood or intention of the person mixing the clay could influence the fermentation process. A positive attitude or even chanting during the mixing stage was thought to encourage a healthier fermentation. Conversely, negative energy might result in a poor outcome. So, apparently, happy thoughts make better mud. It's a charming idea, even if the microbes are probably indifferent to your emotional state. Historians still argue whether the specific microbial processes occurring during clay fermentation were ever understood by ancient potters beyond the observed results, or if the transformation was attributed entirely to natural forces, spiritual influences, or just the way the earth works. Did they have a rudimentary understanding of tiny things changing the mud, or was it seen as a more mysterious, perhaps even magical, process? It's hard to know how ancient minds conceptualized the invisible world of microbes. As you observe the changes in the slurry, you feel a sense of witnessing something fundamental, the power of biological processes to transform inert matter. This isn't just mud, it's living mud, teeming with microscopic life that is actively working to improve its quality for human use. It's a fascinating intersection of nature, tradition, and craft. You might find yourself peering closely at the surface, trying to spot those tiny bubbles, looking for any visual cues that signal success. The smell, while perhaps not conventionally pleasant, becomes associated in your mind with the progress of the process. It's the smell of things happening, of potential being unlocked. It's a reminder that even in something as seemingly simple as mud, there is complex activity. You might even start to appreciate the smell in a weird way, like someone who develops a fondness for the smell of a brewery or a bakery. This first week's observation confirms that the initial step of fermentation has been successful. The microbes are active, the organic matter is breaking down, and the clay is beginning its slow journey towards improved plasticity. The slurry is ready for the next phase, which involves moving it to a more stable, long-term fermentation environment. It's like graduating from the starter bucket to the aging vat. A significant milestone, even if it just looks like you're moving one pile of mud to another location. But remember, it's fermenting mud now. Very different. The container is recovered, while the slurry is prepared for transfer. The sun is high in the sky, or perhaps beginning its descent. Life in the village continues around this quiet, transformative process. The smell of fermenting clay might linger in the air, a subtle reminder of the work underway. You've witnessed the first week's alchemy. The mud is alive. Now, it needs more time and a proper place to continue its slow maturation. The initial fermentation has confirmed that the process is active and the slurry is showing the first signs of transformation. It smells right, it might have a few bubbles, and perhaps the consistency feels a little smoother. Now, this living mud needs to be moved to its long-term aging environment. This isn't a temporary holding spot, it's where the clay will rest and mature for the majority of the 4-week cycle. The fermentation bed is a designated area, specifically prepared for aging clay. It could be a pit dug into the ground, lined to prevent contamination or drying, or it could be a large, sturdy container like a wooden chest or a very large pot. The key requirements are that it needs to be able to hold the volume of slurry, maintain a relatively stable temperature and moisture level, and be protected from the elements and disturbances. Think of it as a special spa suite for the mud. Transferring the slurry from the initial mixing container to the fermentation bed is a physical task. It's heavy, wet mud. You might use buckets, shovels, or simply pour it carefully if the containers allow. The thick, viscous mixture is coaxed and scraped into its new home. As it settles into the fermentation bed, it forms a solid, dense mass. It no longer looks like a liquid slurry, it's more like a very soft, very sticky dough. Once in the fermentation bed, the clay is usually consolidated and covered carefully. The covering is essential to prevent the surface from drying out and to maintain humidity within the mass. It might be a thick layer of wet cloths, plastic sheeting if available, though likely not in ancient times, where hides or woven mats might be used, or even a layer of sand or sawdust to seal the surface. The goal is to keep the clay consistently moist and to create a microenvironment conducive to microbial activity. This is where the bulk of the fermentation occurs. Over the next couple of weeks, the microbes will continue to break down the organic matter, producing more organic acids and complex organic compounds. These compounds interact with the clay minerals, subtly altering their structure and improving their platelet-like alignment. This alignment is what makes clay plastic, allowing the tiny flat particles to slide past each other smoothly when wet, enabling shaping, and then locking together when dry. Fermentation enhances this natural property, making the clay smoother, more workable, and less prone to cracking during drying and firing. A mainstream historical fact is the knowledge among traditional potters worldwide that aged clay is superior to freshly mixed clay. Even if they didn't understand the microbiology involved, they knew from experience that clay left to sit for weeks, months, or even years became easier to work with and produced better results. Many historical pottery workshops had dedicated aging pits, sometimes covering them with water or damp materials to keep the clay moist for extended periods. This practice predates germ theory by centuries. As the clay rests in the fermentation bed, it undergoes internal changes that aren't immediately visible from the outside. The smell might mellow slightly or deepen in complexity. The color might darken. If you were to dig into the mass, which you shouldn't, it's supposed to be left undisturbed, you might feel a slight warmth generated by the microbial activity, like a slow-acting compost pile. This is a quiet, internal transformation happening beneath the surface. A quirky tidbit is that in some traditional practices, specific prayers or rituals were performed over the clay fermentation bed. This was believed to bless the clay, encourage beneficial spirits, and ensure the process unfolded correctly. The spiritual dimension was deeply intertwined with the practical craft. Imagine a potter chanting over a pile of mud, asking the earth spirits to make it extra plastic. It adds a layer of magic to the mundane task. Historians still argue whether the understanding of clay aging evolved independently in multiple cultures as an empirical observation, or if there were early forms of communication or trade that spread knowledge of techniques like intentional fermentation. Was it parallel invention driven by the material properties of clay, or did ideas travel along ancient routes? It's another debate that highlights the interconnectedness, or lack thereof, of ancient artisans. The fermentation bed is now doing its work. The bulk of the waiting game begins. You've done the preparation, the initial mix, and the transfer. Now, you leave it alone. For a week or two, maybe longer, depending on the desired level of fermentation and the local conditions. It's a period of passive waiting, a test of your patience. There's nothing to do but wait. Watch the weather, watch the prayer flags flutter, watch the shadows lengthen and shorten with the sun. You might find yourself checking on the bed occasionally, not to disturb the clay, but just to ensure the covering is intact and the moisture is being retained. It's like checking on a slow cooker meal. You know it's cooking, but you just want to make sure. This stage is less visually exciting than the initial mixing, but it's absolutely critical for the quality of the final clay. This is where the magic really happens, slowly, subtly, underground, or undercover. You think back to the raw earth, the shoveling, the cleaning, the mixing. It all led to this quiet bed of transforming mud. It's a process that demands respect for time and natural processes. In our fast-paced world, the idea of waiting weeks for mud to be ready seems almost absurd. But here, it's just the way it's done. It's the rhythm of the craft, dictated by the earth itself. The clay is resting, getting better, waiting for its turn to be shaped. And you? You are waiting too, practicing the forgotten art of patience. The fermentation bed has been doing its slow, quiet work. The clay has been resting, maturing, transforming over the past week or two. It's had time for the microbes to really work their magic, breaking down organic matter and interacting with the clay minerals. Now, finally, after the period of patient waiting, the clay is ready. Ready to be taken from the bed and prepared for the next stage, shaping. You approach the fermentation bed. The covering is removed. The surface of the clay might look different than when you last saw it. It might be darker, smoother, perhaps with a slightly glossy sheen. The smell is likely stronger now, the characteristic tangy, fermented aroma more pronounced. This is the smell of aged, plastic clay. To a potter, it's probably a beautiful smell, signaling that the material is in its prime. To others, well, it's still fermenting mud. The clay is dug out of the bed. It should be much more uniform in consistency now, smooth and plastic. As you handle it, or watch it being handled, you notice the difference. It's no longer lumpy or gritty. It feels smooth, almost buttery, under the hands. It's pliable, easily molded, but also holds its shape surprisingly well. This is the result of the fermentation, the improved workability that makes the long waiting period worthwhile. Before shaping begins, the clay might undergo a process called wedging or kneading. This is similar to kneading bread dough. The clay is repeatedly folded and pressed to remove any trapped air bubbles and to ensure a perfectly even consistency. Air bubbles can cause pots to explode in the kiln, which is generally considered a bad outcome. So, wedging is a critical step for structural integrity. It's a rhythmic, physical activity, requiring strength and technique. You might see the craftsman slamming the clay onto a surface and then folding it, repeating the motion over and over. It's strangely satisfying to watch, like watching someone knead dough, but much dirtier. Once the clay is wedged and ready, smooth, air-free, and wonderfully plastic, shaping can finally begin. These incense pots are often made using coiling, a traditional pottery technique that doesn't require a fast spinning wheel, though slow wheels or turntables might be used as aids. Coiling involves rolling out ropes of clay and then stacking them layer by layer to build the walls of the pot. The base of the pot is the starting point. A flat circle of clay is formed, perhaps by pressing or rolling a lump of wedged clay. This circle needs to be sturdy, as it will support the weight of the entire structure built upon it. It's like laying the foundation for a building. Get this wrong, and the whole thing could be unstable. A mainstream historical fact is that coiling is one of the oldest and most widespread pottery techniques known to humanity. It was used by cultures all over the world, long before the invention of the fast potter's wheel. Examples of coiled pottery have been found at archaeological sites dating back thousands of years, demonstrating its effectiveness for creating vessels of various shapes and sizes, even very large ones. It's a fundamental human skill. Take soft stuff, roll it, stick it together. Once the base is ready, the coiling begins. A lump of wedged clay is rolled between the hands or on a surface to form a long, snake-like coil. These coils need to be of a relatively consistent thickness. The first coil is placed along the edge of the base and attached firmly. The craftsman uses their fingers to press the coil onto the base, blending the clay together to form a strong bond. This is crucial. If the coils aren't joined properly, the pot will simply fall apart, either during shaping, drying, or firing. As the first coil is attached, a second coil is rolled and placed on top of the first, again pressed and blended to join. This process is repeated, coil after coil, gradually building up the height of the pot's walls. The craftsman might smooth the joins on the inside and outside of the pot as they go, or they might leave the coil texture visible, depending on the desired aesthetic. It's a slow, methodical process, each coil adding just a little bit of height. A quirky tidbit is that some traditional potters would sing or chant rhythmic songs while coiling, believing that the vibrations and positive energy would help the coils join securely and imbue the pot with good spirit. Imagine the soundtrack to this pottery session being a low, resonant hum or a repetitive chant. It turns a simple building technique into a performance art, a blend of physical skill and spiritual practice. Maybe they were just trying to keep themselves from falling asleep? Could be both. Historians still argue whether the development of coiling techniques was primarily driven by the limitations of early technology, no fast wheel, or if it was deliberately chosen and maintained in some cultures for its aesthetic qualities or spiritual significance associated with the layered, organic building process. Was it a necessity or a choice? Perhaps a bit of both, evolving differently in various regions. You watch the pot slowly grow, coil by coil. It's fascinating to see a shape emerge from simple ropes of clay. The craftsman's hands move skillfully, rolling, placing, pressing, smoothing. There's a quiet concentration to the work. Each coil is a small step forward. The pot is still soft and fragile at this stage, easily deformed if handled carelessly. It needs to be built patiently, allowing each section to gain a little firmness before adding the next layers. Sometimes, they might build up a few inches and then let the pot rest for a bit to firm up before adding more coils. It's a dance between building and waiting, adding material and letting it stabilize. This initial shaping phase is focused on the base and the lower section of the pot. It's about establishing the fundamental form and ensuring a solid foundation. The size and shape of the base will dictate the overall dimensions of the pot. It's the groundwork, literally. The fermented clay is working beautifully, smooth and responsive to the touch. You appreciate the long process that made this material so wonderfully workable. You've seen the clay dug from the earth, cleaned, mixed, and left to transform. Now, you see it taking form, coil by painstaking coil. The pot is beginning its life as an object. The base of the pot is laid, the first few coils are in place, and the form is starting to emerge. The shaping continues, building upwards, layer by layer. This phase is all about adding height and refining the overall profile of the pot. It's a continuation of the coiling technique, but with a growing awareness of the final shape the pot is intended to take. As the walls rise, the craftsman controls the diameter of the pot by placing the coils either directly on top of the previous one, for a straight wall, slightly inwards, to narrow the pot, or slightly outwards, to widen it. This careful placement of each coil dictates the curves and angles of the vessel. It requires a steady hand and a clear mental image of the desired form. It's like sculpting from the inside out, using ropes of clay as your building blocks. The thickness of the coils and the pot walls is also important. Walls that are too thin might collapse or be too fragile. Walls that are too thick take forever to dry and can crack during firing. Finding that balance requires experience and feel. The craftsman might gauge the thickness by eye and touch, ensuring it's consistent throughout the developing form. They might use simple tools, like a piece of wood or a stone, to support the inside of the wall while pressing the coils on the outside, helping to maintain an even thickness and smooth the joints. As more coils are added, the weight of the pot increases, and the lower sections need to be firm enough to support the new layers. This is why sometimes the pot is left to rest and firm up after a certain amount of height has been added. It's a delicate balance between building and allowing the clay to set slightly. You can't just coil endlessly. Gravity will eventually win, and your pot will become a sad, slumped mess. Patience, remember? The whole theme of this little adventure. Joining the coils properly remains absolutely vital. The craftsman meticulously presses and blends the clay where each new coil meets the previous layer. They might use their fingers, a wooden tool, or even a damp sponge to smooth and integrate the clay, ensuring there are no visible seams or weak points. On the inside, they might use a smooth stone or a curved piece of wood to smooth the surface and reinforce the joints from within. This internal smoothing also helps to create a continuous, seamless inner wall, which is practical for cleaning and use. A mainstream historical fact is the incredible variety of forms achieved through coiling by ancient cultures. From simple bowls and jars to complex effigy vessels and large storage pots, the coiling technique allowed potters to create a vast array of shapes without the need for a fast wheel. This demonstrates the versatility and sophistication of this ancient method. You could make pretty much anything you needed out of mud coils, as long as you had the skill and patience. As the pot grows taller, it begins to look less like a collection of clay ropes and more like a solid vessel. The individual coils might still be visible on the surface, or they might be completely smoothed away, depending on the desired finish. The shape starts to become defined, perhaps a wide, squat form, or a taller, more cylindrical one, or even something with a distinct neck or shoulder. These shapes are often traditional, passed down through generations for their functional suitability for burning incense or their aesthetic appeal. A quirky tidbit is that some potters believe that imperfections or slight irregularities in the coil-built form gave the pot a unique character and even a kind of soul or life force. A perfectly symmetrical, machine-made pot might be seen as lifeless compared to a hand-coiled one with its subtle wobbles and human touch. It's like appreciating a hand-knitted sweater with a dropped stitch. It tells a story of its making. Historians still argue whether the preference for coil building in certain cultures, even after the introduction of the wheel, was purely based on maintaining tradition and aesthetic preference, or if there were practical reasons related to the specific clay body used. Some clays might be better suited to coiling than throwing, or the types of kills and firing methods available. Was it stubbornness, or practical wisdom, or a combination of both? You watch the pot steadily gaining height. It's a visible progression, a tangible result of the painstaking process. The craftsman works with quiet focus, their hands moving with practiced ease. The scent of fermented clay fills the air, maybe less pungent now that it's being worked and exposed to the air, but still present. You might feel a growing respect for the skill and patience involved. This isn't a quick hobby, it's a craft that demands dedication and a deep connection to the material. The pot now has significant height. It's past the base, past the initial curve, and is building towards the upper sections. The form is established, and the focus will soon shift to the details that define the pot's purpose and appearance. You've seen the earth gathered, cleaned, fermented, and now coiled into a recognizable shape. It's a journey from inert material to functional object, step by slow step. The walls are rising, and the pot is approaching its full stature. The next stage will be shaping the crucial upper parts, the shoulder, neck, and rim, which are vital for both function and form. The pot is getting closer to being complete, in its raw, unfired state, but there's still plenty more to do, and plenty more waiting to be done. The main body of the pot has been built up using the coiling technique. It has height and a basic shape. Now comes the crucial stage of defining the upper section, the shoulder, the neck, if there is one, and the rim. These parts are vital for the pot's function as an incense burner and contribute significantly to its overall aesthetic. It's where the form is finalized before the drying process truly begins. Shaping the shoulder involves transitioning the form from the main body of the pot inwards towards the neck or rim. This might be a gentle curve, a sharp angle, or a more complex profile. The craftsman carefully adjusts the placement of the coils, moving them progressively inwards to create the desired constriction or curve. This requires precision, as any asymmetry here will be very noticeable in the final pot. It's like shaping the shoulders on a garment, crucial for how it sits. If the pot has a neck, this section is coiled upwards from the shoulder, maintaining a narrower diameter. The height and angle of the neck can vary greatly depending on the traditional style of the pot. Some incense pots might have a short, wide neck, while others might have a taller, more slender one. The craftsman continues to coil and smooth, ensuring the neck is strong enough to support the rim and any weight placed upon it, like a lid, though these pots often don't have fitted lids. The rim is the finishing touch on the opening of the pot. It needs to be strong, smooth, and well-formed, as it's the part of the pot that will be most directly interacted with when incense is placed inside or removed. The rim can be simple and rounded, flattened, thickened, or given a more complex profile like a lip or flange. The craftsman might fold the top edge of the last coil outwards or inwards, or add a final, thicker coil specifically shaped to form the rim. They carefully smooth and finish the rim, ensuring it's comfortable to the touch and visually appealing. This is where the pot gets its mouth. As these upper sections are shaped, the craftsman pays close attention to symmetry and balance. They might step back frequently to view the pot from different angles, ensuring the shape is harmonious. Simple tools, like calipers made from wood or bone, might be used to check the diameter at different points and ensure consistency. It's a blend of freehand sculpting and careful measurement. The clay at this stage is still quite plastic, but the lower sections will have firmed up considerably, providing a stable base for the work on the upper parts. The craftsman works deliberately, smoothing joins, refining curves, and ensuring the walls are of consistent thickness right up to the rim. Any excess clay is trimmed away. The surface might be smoothed with a damp cloth or a smooth stone, giving it a more finished appearance even before it's fully dry. A mainstream historical fact is that the forms of pottery vessels often served specific functional or ritualistic purposes, and these shapes were frequently codified and passed down through generations within a culture. The shape of an incense pot's rim or neck wasn't just aesthetic. It might be designed to hold a specific type of incense, to allow airflow, or to facilitate the placement of offerings. The form follows function, steeped in tradition. A quirky tidbit is that some traditional potters believe that imbuing the pot with specific intentions or prayers during the shaping of the rim would affect the type of energy the pot would hold and release when used for burning incense. The final touches were seen not just as technical steps, but as opportunities to infuse the object with spiritual meaning. Imagine focusing intensely on peace or clarity as you shape the very top of the pot. Historians still argue whether the evolution of specific regional pottery shapes was primarily driven by practical innovations, e.g., a certain rim shape made stacking easier, aesthetic preferences influenced by cultural exchange, or symbolic meanings embedded within the forms themselves. Was a particular shape chosen because it worked well, because it looked good, or because it meant something specific in a ritual context? Likely, it was a complex interplay of all these factors. With the rim complete, the pot is essentially finished in its raw, greenware state. It has its full form, from base to rim. It looks like a pot now, a recognizable vessel. You can imagine it sitting somewhere, smoke curling gently from its opening. But it's still incredibly fragile. The clay is wet and easily damaged. Picking it up carelessly would likely result in dents, deformation, or even collapse. It needs to dry, slowly and carefully. The air in the courtyard might carry the lingering scent of fermented clay, now perhaps mixed with the dry, dusty smell of the environment. The sun might be high overhead, or perhaps the light is softening towards evening. The craftsman looks at the completed form with a critical eye, making any final small adjustments before declaring this stage complete. There's a sense of quiet satisfaction in seeing the vessel fully formed after weeks of preparation and patient building. The pot stands there, a testament to the process. It's a physical object born from earth, water, organic matter, time, and human skill. It's still a long way from being a finished, usable incense pot. It hasn't been dried completely, it hasn't been decorated, and it hasn't faced the transformative heat of the kiln. But the shaping is done. The raw form is complete. The next, equally crucial, step is to begin the slow, controlled drying process. Rush this, and all the previous work is for nothing. The pot needs to gently release its moisture, preparing for the fiery trial ahead. The pot is fully shaped, standing in its raw, greenware state. It's beautiful in its form, a culmination of the past week's work. But it's also incredibly vulnerable. Full of water, the clay is soft and fragile. The next critical step is drying. This isn't something you rush, it's a slow, controlled process that allows the water to evaporate evenly from the clay body. If it dries too quickly or unevenly, stresses build up within the clay, leading to cracks, warping, or even complete disintegration. Think of it like letting a cake cool too fast out of the oven, it can crack and fall apart. The pot is carefully moved to a designated drying area. This area needs to be protected from direct sunlight, drafts, and sudden changes in temperature or humidity. On the high Tibetan Plateau, conditions can be very dry and windy, which can accelerate drying dangerously. So, the drying area might be indoors, in a shaded corner of a courtyard, or covered with cloth or mats. The goal is to create a stable, gentle environment for the pot to gradually lose its moisture. The pot is placed on a flat, stable surface, perhaps a board or a mat, to prevent it from deforming under its own weight. It's often covered loosely with cloth, plastic sheeting, or even newspaper, if available, though less likely in ancient times, to slow down the evaporation rate, especially from the thinner sections like the rim or upper walls, which would otherwise dry faster than the thicker base. This encourages the entire pot to dry at a more uniform pace. This initial drying period, sometimes called leather-hard drying, might take several days. During this phase, the clay is still damp enough to be worked on, but firm enough to hold its shape without collapsing. It has the consistency of firm cheese or leather, hence the name. This is often the stage where any decorative work is applied, which we'll get to next. But even if there's no decoration, the pot still needs to reach this stage before the next phase of drying can begin. As the water evaporates, the clay body shrinks. This is because the water molecules that were lubricating the clay particles and pushing them apart are leaving, allowing the particles to pull closer together. This shrinkage is a natural part of the drying process, but if it happens too fast or unevenly, it causes stress. Thicker parts of the pot dry slower than thinner parts, leading to differential shrinkage and potential cracking. Controlling the drying rate helps manage this shrinkage evenly. A mainstream historical fact about pottery drying is that traditional potters in various cultures developed ingenious low-tech methods for controlling the drying process based on local climate conditions. In arid regions, they might dry pots in pits dug into the ground to benefit from cooler, more humid underground air. In humid regions, they might use elevated racks or gentle air circulation. It was all about managing moisture exchange with the environment using readily available materials. You might see the craftsman checking on the drying pot periodically, feeling the surface to gauge its dampness, perhaps adjusting the covering. They are looking for an even change in color from the dark wet clay to a lighter, drier shade. They might turn the pot occasionally to expose different sides to the air, promoting even drying. It's a passive process from your perspective, but it requires vigilance from the potter. You can't just set it and forget it, unless you want a pile of cracked regrets. A quirky tidbit is that some traditional potters believe that drying the pot under the influence of certain planetary alignments or astrological signs would ensure its strength and prevent cracking during firing. The cosmos was thought to play a role in the mundane process of evaporation. Imagine scheduling your drying based on whether Mercury is in retrograde. Probably makes rush jobs even less appealing. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on slow, controlled drying in many ancient pottery traditions was primarily a result of trial and error, learning that faster drying led to breakage, or if there were symbolic or ritualistic meanings attached to the gradual transformation of the earth element through air and time. Was it purely practical knowledge, or did it have deeper layers of meaning? The pot sits there, silent and still, undergoing its invisible transformation. The fermented clay, which was so plastic and workable, is now slowly losing its moisture, becoming more brittle. You might feel a sense of anxiety watching it, knowing how easily it could be ruined at this stage. It feels like holding your breath. This initial drying brings the pot to the leather hard state, where it's firm but still contains a significant amount of water. It's ready for the next step, which often involves adding decoration. The clay is still soft enough to be carved, incised, or have other elements applied, but firm enough to hold the shape of these additions. It's a sweet spot in the drying process, a brief window of opportunity before the clay becomes too hard to work with. The pot isn't finished drying, not by a long shot, but it's reached a crucial intermediate stage, ready for its surface treatment. The patience continues. The pot has reached the leather-hard stage, firm enough to handle gently without losing its shape, but still damp enough to accept decoration. This is a key moment, as many types of surface decoration are best applied when the clay is at this specific consistency. It's a brief window between being too soft to touch and too hard to mark. Decorative touches on these incense pots can range from simple incised lines or geometric patterns to applied elements or even carved designs. The choice of decoration often reflects traditional motifs, religious symbols, or aesthetic preferences unique to the region or the potter's lineage. These decorations aren't just pretty, they often carry meaning, telling stories, invoking blessings, or representing specific aspects of the natural or spiritual world. Using simple tools, perhaps sharpened sticks, bone tools, or pieces of metal, the craftsman begins to work on the surface of the leather-hard pot. If the decoration involves incising, they carefully draw or press lines into the clay. The clay is firm enough that the lines hold their crispness, but soft enough that the tool leaves a clean mark without tearing the surface. The pressure needs to be consistent to create even lines. It's like drawing on firm clay, requiring a steady hand and a clear design in mind. Applied decoration involves adding separate pieces of clay to the surface of the pot. This might be in the form of small coils, pellets, or shaped elements like symbols or figures. Before applying these pieces, the surfaces where they will be attached are often scored, roughened with crisscross lines, and wetted with a little water or a clay slip, a watery clay mixture. This helps the applied piece bond securely to the pot body, preventing it from falling off during drying or firing. It's like using glue, but with mud. The applied pieces are then pressed firmly onto the prepared surface and blended slightly at the edges to ensure a strong attachment. Carving involves removing clay from the surface to create raised or recessed designs. This requires sharp tools and careful control, as removing too much clay or digging too deeply can weaken the pot's wall. The leather-hard consistency is ideal for carving, as the clay is firm enough to allow for clean cuts without crumbling, but soft enough to carve relatively easily. The motifs used in Tibetan pottery decoration are rich with symbolism. You might see auspicious symbols like the 8 auspicious symbols, Tashi Tagi, geometric patterns representing mandalas or cosmic structures, or stylized representations of animals or plants significant in Tibetan culture and religion. These designs are not random, they are part of a visual language that communicates meaning and intent. The pot becomes not just a vessel, but a canvas for sacred art and cultural expression. A mainstream historical fact is the widespread use of surface decoration on pottery across nearly all ancient cultures. From simple finger marks and impressed textures to elaborate painted scenes and sculptural additions, decorating pottery was a common practice. These decorations provide invaluable insights for archaeologists into the beliefs, aesthetics, and daily lives of the people who made and used the pots. Decorations weren't just for show, they were a form of communication and cultural identity. As the craftsman works, you might observe the precision and focus required. Each line, each applied element, is placed with intention. There's a quiet rhythm to the work, perhaps accompanied by the gentle scraping of tools against the clay. The smell of the fermenting clay might be less noticeable now, replaced by the dry, dusty scent of the drying surface and perhaps the faint smell of the material used for scoring or wetting. A quirky tidbit is that some traditional potters believed that the act of decorating the pot was a way of dressing it or giving it life before it faced the transformative fire. The decoration wasn't just adding to an object, it was participating in a process of imbuing it with personality and spirit. Imagine thinking of your pot as getting dressed up for a party, the firing. Historians still argue whether specific decorative motifs and styles developed independently in different regions of the Tibetan Plateau or if they spread through cultural exchange, trade, or the movement of people and ideas, including religious practices. Were similar symbols adopted because they were functional, e.g., good luck symbols, or did they evolve from local traditions? The decoration complete, the pot now has its final surface treatment. It looks more finished, more like the object it is intended to be. The incised lines, applied elements, or carved textures stand out against the relatively smooth surface of the pot body. It has gained complexity and visual interest. However, adding decoration at the leather hard stage doesn't mean the pot is finished drying. Far from it. The decoration itself, especially applied elements, might introduce new areas of varying thickness, which can affect the subsequent drying process. The pot still contains a significant amount of water and needs to continue drying slowly and evenly until it is completely bone dry. This final stage of drying is critical for the pot's survival in the kiln. The decorative touches are in place, but the long wait continues. The pot is dressed, but not yet ready for the heat. The decorative touches have been added to the pot while it was in the leather-hard state. It now stands there, adorned with its patterns, symbols, or textures. It's still not dry, though. Far from it. The pot, with its newly added decorations, needs to continue maturing in the drying area. This is the phase where the decorations themselves integrate fully with the pot body, and the entire structure continues to lose moisture at a controlled pace. This stage, following decoration, can take several more days, sometimes even a week or two, depending on the size and thickness of the pot, the complexity of the decorations, and the ambient environmental conditions. The pot remains in the protected drying area, shielded from direct sun and drafts, often still loosely covered to ensure slow, even drying. The clay continues to shrink as more water evaporates, and it's crucial that the main body of the pot and the decorative elements shrink together harmoniously. Applied decorations, especially, can be points of weakness if they don't dry and shrink at the same rate as the pot body. If the applied clay dries faster, it can pull away from the surface or crack. If it dries slower, it can impede the drying of the main pot wall beneath it. This is one reason why applying decorations at the leather hard stage is important. The clay is still flexible enough to accommodate some differential shrinkage, and the bond between the pot and the decoration is still forming as they dry together. It's like siblings growing up together. Ideally, they stay attached. As the pot dries further, its color continues to lighten. The darker, damp patches gradually disappear, replaced by a uniform, lighter shade of the raw clay color. The texture of the surface and decorations also becomes more pronounced as the water leaves the clay, making the details sharper. The smell of the fermented clay might fade significantly at this point, replaced by the dry, dusty smell of completely dry clay. A mainstream historical fact is that decorative techniques and the stage of drying at which they were applied varied widely across different ancient pottery traditions. Some cultures preferred applying slip or paint to bone-dry clay, while others worked on leather-hard surfaces with carving or impressing tools. Understanding when decoration was applied is a key piece of information for archaeologists trying to replicate or understand ancient pottery production processes. It's like figuring out if they frosted the cake before or after baking. During this maturation period, the craftsman continues to monitor the pot's drying progress. They might gently tap the pot to listen to the sound. A dry pot will produce a different, more resonant sound than a damp one. They might lift it to feel the weight. A pot loses significant weight as it dries and the water evaporates. They are looking for signs that the moisture content is decreasing steadily and evenly throughout the entire structure, including the decorated areas. A quirky tidbit is that in some traditions, specific protective symbols or talismans were placed near the drying pots to ward off negative spirits or energies that might interfere with the drying process and cause the pot to crack. The belief was that vulnerability during drying made the pot susceptible to unseen forces. Imagine putting a little protective charm next to your drying ceramic mug. Can't hurt, right? Historians still argue whether the sophisticated understanding of clay properties and drying dynamics demonstrated by ancient potters was purely empirical. They just noticed what worked and what didn't over generations, or if it was informed by a more theoretical, even if non-scientific by modern standards, understanding of how materials change. Did they just follow recipes, or did they have principles they were applying? The pot sits in the drying area, day after day. It's a quiet, uneventful process to observe. The excitement of shaping and decorating is over for now. This stage is purely about patience and allowing nature to take its course, under controlled conditions. You might find yourself checking on it too, becoming invested in its slow progress towards dryness. It looks more and more like a finished pot, but you know it's still fragile, not yet fired, not yet hardened into ceramic. The decorations, which looked fresh and maybe slightly raised when applied, now seem fully integrated into the surface, their edges smoothed by the subtle shrinkage of the clay. They are part of the pot now, not just sitting on the surface. This maturation is important for their visual appearance in the final fired piece. The pot is getting closer to being completely dry, or bone dry. This is the point where virtually all the physical water has evaporated from the clay body. It will feel lighter, look lighter in color, and feel completely dry to the touch. It will also be at its most brittle and fragile state. Bone-dry clay has very little structural strength and can break easily with even slight mishandling. Reaching this stage is essential before firing, as any remaining water will turn to steam rapidly in the kiln's heat, causing the pot to explode. You do not want your pot to explode. Trust me. This period of continued drying allows the pot to shed the last vestiges of moisture and ensures that both the main body and the decorations are uniformly dry. It's the final step before the fiery trial. The pot is maturing, hardening, getting ready for its ultimate transformation. You've watched it grow, be decorated, and now slowly, steadily, dry out. It's a test of endurance, for the pot and for you. The pot, with its decorations now fully integrated and looking more defined, continues its journey towards complete dryness. It's been weeks since the earth was first gathered, weeks since the organic matter was added, weeks since the coils were laid and the final rim was shaped. Now, the slow process of evaporation is bringing it to the final, most fragile state before firing, bone dry. You observe the pot resting in its protected spot. Its color is significantly lighter now, a pale, dusty shade compared to the deep brown or red of the wet clay. There are no more dark, damp patches. The surface feels completely dry to the touch, cool and powdery. You might gently tap it with a fingernail, and instead of a dull thud, you hear a light, resonant click. This sound is a good indicator that most of the physical water has left the clay body. At this stage, the pot has shrunk considerably since it was first shaped. The clay particles have pulled as close together as they will get through drying alone. The pot is now at its maximum brittleness. Bone-dry clay has almost no flexibility. It's essentially a solid mass of loosely bound particles. Picking it up carelessly, bumping it, or even exposing it to a sudden draft could cause it to break or crumble. It feels lighter than you expect, all that water weight gone. It's like holding a very fragile, dusty shell. Handle with extreme care, like you're carrying a stack of antique potato chips. Ensuring the pot is completely bone-dry is absolutely critical before it goes anywhere near a kiln. Any residual moisture, even a tiny amount hidden deep within a thick wall or base, will turn to steam when exposed to the intense heat of the firing. This steam expands rapidly, and if it can't escape the clay body instantly, it will literally blow the pot apart. This is called a steam explosion, and it's the bane of potters everywhere. All that work, weeks of patient effort, reduced to shards in moments because of a forgotten pocket of water. It's the pottery equivalent of forgetting your umbrella on a rainy day, but with more catastrophic results for the umbrella. To ensure bone dryness, the pot might be moved to an even warmer or drier location for a final curing period. This could be near a gentle heat source, though not too close, or it could still dry too fast on one side, or simply in the driest, warmest spot available in the village, perhaps near a hearth that's radiating residual heat. This final stage is about removing that last 1 to 2% of chemically bonded water, the stuff that doesn't just evaporate at room temperature. It needs a bit more encouragement. A mainstream historical fact about firing preparation is that traditional potters in various cultures often preheated their kilns or placed bone-dry pots near the kiln opening for a period before the main firing began. This gentle preheating helped to remove any last traces of moisture gradually, minimizing the risk of breakage when the pots were finally subjected to the intense heat. It was a clever, energy-efficient way to avoid pottery explosions. Basically, they gave the pots a little warm-up before throwing them into the inferno. As the pot sits there, waiting for its fiery fate, the focus shifts to preparing the kiln. Traditional Tibetan kilns were often simple pit kilns or updraft kilns built from mud and stone. They weren't sophisticated electric or gas kilns with precise temperature controls. Firing was a communal event, requiring significant amounts of fuel, often wood or dried animal dung, both precious resources on the high plateau. Preparing the kiln involves gathering and drying fuel, checking the structure of the kiln, and planning the loading. Loading the kiln is another critical step. Bone-dry pots are carefully placed inside, usually stacked in a way that maximizes space but also allows for even heat circulation. Care must be taken not to bump or damage the incredibly fragile pots during loading. It's like playing a high-stakes game of Tetris with eggshells. Pots might be separated by small wads of clay or shards from previous firings to prevent them from sticking together or deforming during the intense heat. A quirky tidbit is that in some traditional firing rituals, offerings or prayers were made to the fire spirits or the earth spirits before lighting the kiln. The firing was seen as a transformative, almost sacred, process, and appeasing the forces involved was crucial for a successful outcome. Imagine asking permission from a fire before you light it. Makes you think twice about just tossing that match. Historians still argue whether the development of specific kiln types and firing techniques in different regions of the Tibetan Plateau was primarily driven by the availability of fuel sources, the need to fire specific types of clay bodies, or cultural preferences and beliefs about the firing process itself. Did they build kilns the way they did because of the wood they had, the mud they used, or the spirits they believed in? Probably a blend, as usual. The bone-dry pot sits ready. It has survived the gathering, the cleaning, the fermentation, the shaping, the decorating, and the slow, nerve-wracking process of drying. It is at its most vulnerable state, yet it is also ready for the final, most dramatic transformation. All the potential built into the clay through weeks of work is now waiting to be unlocked by fire. The craftsman looks at the kiln, at the fuel, at the pots. There's a sense of anticipation, a quiet tension. The fate of weeks of effort hangs in the balance, dependent on the upcoming firing. The pots are ready for the heat. Are you ready for the heat? Well, you're just observing, so probably. The pots, less so. The bone-dry pot rests, a pale, fragile ghost of the finished article. It has shed its water weight and sits at its most vulnerable point, awaiting the ultimate trial by fire. The kiln has been prepared, fuel gathered, loading meticulously done. The atmosphere around the firing site is different now, a sense of anticipation, perhaps mixed with a little anxiety. This is the moment of truth, where weeks of work either solidify into something durable or crumble into dust. The firing begins. Fire is introduced into the kiln, perhaps a small fire started in the firebox or within the kiln structure itself, using kindling and dry fuel. The heat is increased gradually. This initial phase is crucial for driving off any last, stubborn traces of moisture from the pots and the kiln structure itself. A slow warm-up prevents steam explosions. The temperature rises slowly, creeping up degree by degree. You can hear the crackling of the fire, feel the radiant heat beginning to spread. Smoke rises, thick at first, then perhaps thinning as the fire takes hold. As the temperature climbs, the clay undergoes a series of transformations. First, any remaining physical water boils off, usually below 212 degrees Fahrenheit 100 degrees Celsius. Then, as the heat increases further, chemically bonded water, which is part of the clay mineral structure itself, is driven off in a process called dehydration, typically occurring between 660 degrees Fahrenheit and 1470 degrees Fahrenheit, 350 degrees Celsius and 800 degrees Celsius. At this point, the clay is still fragile and porous. As the temperature goes higher, closer to the peak firing temperature for this type of low-fired pottery, often somewhere between 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit and 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, around 700 to 1,000 degrees Celsius, the ceramic change happens. The clay particles begin to fuse together in a process called vitrification. They don't melt completely, that would require much higher temperatures, but they soften and create strong bonds between them. This is what turns the fragile, bone-dry clay into hard, durable ceramic. The mineral structure changes permanently. It's like the particles hold hands and decide to become best friends forever, creating a super strong network. Maintaining the correct temperature for the right amount of time is key. In a traditional kiln without modern controls, this relies entirely on the skill and experience of the fire tenders. They judge the temperature by the color of the flames and the interior of the kiln, or by watching the cones, small, carefully formulated ceramic indicators placed inside the kiln that bend at specific temperatures. Fuel is added constantly to keep the temperature rising or steady. It's a continuous, demanding process, often requiring shifts of people tending the fire around the clock. You can feel the heat radiating from the kiln, intense and powerful. The sound is the roar of the fire, punctuated by the adding of more fuel. It's a bit dramatic, isn't it? After weeks of quiet patience, you get this fiery climax. A mainstream historical fact is that traditional firing often involved communal effort. Building, loading, and firing a kiln was a labor-intensive process that required the participation of multiple people, sometimes entire villages. Firing events were important social occasions, bringing communities together for this crucial stage of pottery production. It wasn't just a solo craft, it was a community undertaking. The firing might last for several hours, perhaps even a full day or more, depending on the size of the kiln and the type of clay and fuel. Once the peak temperature is reached and held for the necessary duration, the fire is allowed to die down, and the kiln is sealed. The pots must cool down very slowly and gradually. Opening the kiln too early or allowing cool air to rush in can cause thermal shock, leading to cracks or breakage, undoing all the work. Cooling can take another day or two, sometimes even longer. Patience, remember. Even the cooling is a waiting game. A quirky tidbit is that in some traditional firing practices, certain sounds or omens during the firing process were interpreted as signs of success or failure. A particularly loud crack might mean a pot exploded, oops, while a steady, even roar might be a good sign. Potters would listen intently to the sounds coming from the kiln, trying to divine the outcome. It was a bit like listening to the heartbeat of the fire. Historians still argue whether the development of different kiln designs and firing schedules was primarily driven by the need to achieve higher temperatures, improve fuel efficiency, or accommodate specific types of pottery or clay bodies used in a region. Was it about getting hotter, using less wood, or firing a particular kind of pot? It's a debate about the driving forces behind technological innovation in ancient crafts. Finally, after the firing and the long cooling period, the kiln is opened. It's a moment of quiet anticipation. As the door is carefully unsealed and removed, a wave of warm air, carrying the distinct smell of fired clay and ash, escapes. You peer inside. The pots are visible, transformed. They are no longer pale, fragile, bone-dry forms. They are hard, solid, ceramic vessels. Their color has changed, often deepening and becoming richer during firing, perhaps with variations depending on how much oxygen was available in different parts of the kiln. The decorations, applied weeks ago on the leather-hard clay, are now permanently fused to the surface, part of the hard, durable ceramic. You can pick up a finished pot. Carefully, they might still be warm. It feels solid and resonant. You tap it, and it produces a clear, ringing sound, the sound of fired ceramic. It has endured the fire and emerged transformed. It is no longer susceptible to melting in water or crumbling when dropped. Within reason, don't test this theory with a hammer. It is durable, ready for use. The fermentation process, which improved the clay's workability, and the careful shaping, decorating, drying, and firing have culminated in this functional, resilient object. Remember that smelly, organic-infused mud? This is the end product. Impressive, right? This incense pot is now ready to fulfill its purpose. It can hold hot ash and smoldering incense without breaking down. Its form and decoration carry the weight of tradition and meaning. It's a testament to the interconnectedness of earth, water, organic life, fire, and human hands, guided by generations of knowledge and immense patience. The 4-week process is complete. From humble earth to functional ceramic, it's a slow, deliberate journey. And so, the journey ends. The pot stands ready, holding the history of its making within its fired walls. Its purpose is simple, to hold and release the fragrant smoke of incense, adding another layer of sensory experience to the quiet rhythms of life on the plateau. You've witnessed the entire, slow, painstaking process. Hopefully, it was boring enough to gently lull you towards sleep. The sounds of the village, the feel of the thin air, the sight of the vast sky, they begin to fade now. Your connection to the quiet courtyard and the patient craftsman softens. The details of clay and coils and kilns recede. All that remains is the gentle hum of the fan, perhaps, or the quiet darkness of your room. The journey back from the high plateau is much faster in your mind than the journey you just witnessed. The smells and sights and sounds soften, becoming distant echoes. The pot is finished, its work in the story done. Your work, too, is almost done, the work of listening, of letting the slow history wash over you. There's nothing left to do now but drift. Let the images fade. Let the sounds soften. Let the quiet descend. You did it. You survived, or maybe succumbed to, the 4-week process of creating a fermented incense pot. The earth rests, the fire is out, and the pot is complete.